Welcome to the Adventures in Learning podcast. I have one of my all-time favorite guests back with us today. Katherine Applegate has been on the road this spring with Wombat waiting. And I have to tell you, I spent the last couple of weeks going down a Katherine Applegate rabbit hole, and I have enjoyed every moment of it. I loved Wombat waiting. There's almost a Zen-like Buddhist quality to this book. It's so beautiful. It's the book that I think we need right now. I read it hot on the heels of finally reading Pocket Bear, which I immediately gifted to my youngest daughter, who owns 25, I think, at this counting, stuffed animals. And I have been sharing Otter and Wish Tree while I've been on the road this year. So I am so happy to have Katherine back. She's such a breath of fresh air. Wonder, curiosity, connection. Where will your adventures take you? I'm Dr. Diane, and thank you for joining me on today's episode of Adventures in Learning. Katherine, I'm glad to have you back.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be with you. And I adore your daughter for having all those stuffed animals. I am not allowed in like a Jellycat store anymore because it's so dangerous for me. And I am, grown up, but there's something so seductive. So I love that story. And I like your description of Wombat as Zen. That's perfect because it's about waiting.
It really is. And that's sort of what struck me as I was reading it, is you've got this dog with a destiny and a purpose. And you can't just grab that destiny or that purpose. The dog has to wait. And the story is a lot about waiting for things to happen, but also waiting for emotions to settle, waiting for timing to be right. Tell us a little bit about Wombat waiting. What inspired it? How have people been receiving it on the road?
It's been so gratifying. I think it appeals to young readers who maybe are a little put off by longer novels because it's in free verse and there's lots of white space. I love my white space. And I think it's less intimidating for that reason. I used to live in Los Angeles, and the fire issues all over the West Coast, sadly, just about everywhere these days, were enormous. I was never directly involved in a fire, but watched, plenty of skies turn dark orange and, watch people being evacuated. And so this particular story is set during the 2025 Eaton and Palisades fires, particularly kind of without naming it. It's inspired by the Altadena community, which is this lovely, diverse, charming community that had been there forever. And it was just decimated by this fire. People died. Animals died, buildings destroyed, and I wanted to talk about climate change again, and I wanted to do it in a way that was not too overwhelming for a young reader. So they think about it, but understand, there's hope when we get through these really dark times. And stray dogs seem like the perfect way to do it. So Wombat is not a wombat, looks a bit like a wombat. I've heard a lot of kids, where is the wombat in this story? And she is a stray on the streets of Los Angeles as a fire approaches. And this voice in her head says, that way. And unfortunately, that way is straight into the fires. And I wanted to remind kids that sometimes we have that little inner voice inside of us that isn't maybe what other people are telling you. There's something inside of you that says, I'm this, or I need to do this. And to listen to that, of course, with parental supervision. And Wombat ends up heading off into the fire because that seems to be her destiny.
And her destiny brings her outside of her comfort zone. Yeah. She's a stray dog. She doesn't, she's been a stray since she was a baby. And building relationships with humans is a real challenge. And she's asked to go outside of her self-protection to be present for people who have lost everything. How did you managed to get this across in so few words? How did you go about creating that community of people that she interacts with? And how did you then narrow down the words so that you're really telling a story in as few words as possible?
Oh, I love that part. That's my favorite part of writing. I hate the blank page. Terrifies me. That getting started on a story. But once I have something to work with, I think the editing, the chiseling away at this big rock of words is the best part. So I love that. Wombat was loosely based on a dog I have now whose name is Astrid. And Astrid was a stray on the streets of LA, actually, who had been found when she was 3 months old, and someone had broken her neck. And they were going to put her to sleep. And this wonderful rescue took her in, and we were told we could only have Astrid if she never played with other dogs because of her delicate neck. And she was, of course, miserable. So we went back to the surgeon and said, what if we get a rescue dog for our rescue dog? So now we have this little bitty pug, also a stray, who is sort of Astrid's rescue dog. So Astrid is very much like Wombat, terrified of people. It's always a long, slow process, with a dog who's been through a lot. So that's where the resistance to humans comes from. And Wombat does come full circle, though. She learns how to comfort. She's right next to, she bases herself. She ends up on a bench. And I was thinking about, you remember Hachiko, the Japanese Akita who waited and waited and waited for his owner? I love the idea of a dog being that loyal and that patient. So she ends up waiting on this bench and not knowing why. And she's close enough to the shelter that all these people keep coming past who need comforting. And eventually she rises to the occasion. It takes her a while, though.
And she finds her destiny.
Indeed. Indeed. And I love that. I have, when I'm doing my talk at schools, I show kids, we talk about rescue dogs. The dog, so many of us have taken in dogs from shelters and that kind of thing. But I think a destiny dog is a little different. They're the ones that, follow you home, or they just randomly show up on your doorstep and suddenly you have a dog, even if you didn't know you needed a dog. And she ends up, getting exactly. I don't think we're giving too much away to say that it does have a happy ending.
And you have something absolutely charming in the afterwards where you build a connection back to Bob and the Ivan stories. And I'm wondering if you'll share that story with our listeners now, because I read that and I just started laughing because I was like, leave it to Katherine to find a way to connect this story back to Bob.
I love Bob. Bob was the dog in The One and Only Ivan. It was Ivan's best friend. And Bob went on to have a book of his own called The One and Only Bob. The audiobook, by the way, is narrated by Danny DeVito, and it's hilarious. And Bob is dissing Hachiko in one particular chapter. Why would a dog sit around waiting for a dead guy? What an idiot. And so I came to Hachiko and Wombat's defense and said, Bob, look, sometimes it's worth waiting. And so, I'd like to tell Bob he was a little off the mark on that one.
I just think that's charming. And you've been out on the road. Are you done with your book tour? Are you drawing to the end of it?
Just finished. And it was really great. It's, man, I love going to schools. There is something about seeing your actual readers and getting feedback that is invaluable. Also librarians and teachers, because I hear how they use books and what works. And it's hugely helpful as a writer to have that privilege to go out and do that.
I was teaching a class for Shenandoah University this spring, and it was a distance class. And so I'm not in Winchester any longer, but my students were. And about the time that you were doing the rally for reading, I had a student who came in and she goes, oh my gosh, my son came home with a book today and he is so excited about it because he met the author and the author signed the book. And he's going on. And it turns out it was your book. And the mom, it was the same week I had them choose a fantasy and she was reading Ivan. And so she was suddenly so cool in her child's eyes because he was telling her all about Katherine Applegate and the fact that he met a real live author at his school.
It's so great because it demystifies the whole author thing. I think I would have become a writer a lot sooner if I'd just seen an author, had one visit my own school or maybe done one school. I think the one school, one book ideas are great because Everybody reads the same book. And even if you don't like the book, you were in a conversation about reading in a whole different way. So I love that. I love to hear that story because that's exactly what you want. You want to make that connection.
Well, in events like Dr. Huff's Rally for Reading, events like the library summer programs where they theme things and they connect books to them, the one book, one school reads, those are so important for sort of encouraging reading and getting kids excited about reading. What are you seeing or what are you thinking as you're seeing kids? Because, we hear all kinds of things in the news. We hear that kids don't love to read, that they have no attention spans anymore. We hear things that, books aren't great. We know that's not true, but we hear it. How do we encourage kids to find that book for themselves to become readers? And I know you were a reluctant reader.
Oh, yes, very much so. That's one of the things I always tell kids because I think it's so important to know that it doesn't always happen automatically. I tell them find your best friend book, and for me it was Charlotte's Web. But up until then, I wanted nothing to do with books. Loved animals. Here was a book with a talking pig in it, and it was my gateway drug, and I loved it. But it takes a while. And I do think we have to be very careful not to dismiss, say, graphic novels, which are often the way that kids find their way into serious reading, or series books or things that are quote, lightweight, because, I love books like that. And sometimes I just need a good fantasy to get me out of the darker literary stuff I'm reading. You need to be entertained. And
Comfort
so
food.
comfort food, exactly. I watched I'm in a hotel, so there weren't a lot of options. Last night I watched like an ancient episode of Friends, and I thought, this is perfect sitcom comfort food. Sometimes you just need that. So
Exactly.
for kids, we have to give them the space to explore and experiment.
I think, and also not be afraid to offer options, to show
Yeah.
kids books where they can see themselves reflected, but also to show them books where they can see things they've never experienced. And you keep offering, you introduce global authors, you introduce global stories, and you broaden the world, you give them the opportunity to enter again and again.
And something you know very well is that picture books are often a great entree for older kids. Sometimes an eighth grader just would love to dive into, an old childhood picture book that they adored, and they feel too uncomfortable to do it. And I think when you talk about picture books that way, it opens that avenue to a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I feel like picture books, I still love a good picture book.
Me
And I think that they're some of the most sophisticated art out there because they're
Yeah.
storytelling and we stop them way too early because we think, oh, the kid can read. They don't need a picture book anymore. And those
Yes.
are often the books that are good for our kids who are struggling with dyslexia. They're good for our kids who maybe are more visual learners and they need the power of seeing the story unfold before them. Kids with shorter attention spans, a picture book is great. And I find they're a good gateway drug into whatever you're teaching too. Like if
Yeah.
you want to teach personification, for example, Lemony Snicket's The Dark is a brilliant companion for that. And you can teach personification like that.
That's brilliant. That's a perfect example. And part of it is just, I think, the curriculums tend to be so micromanaged now, and there are so many testing goals, blah, blah, blah. We all know the problems, but it doesn't allow teachers that freedom. And of course, with book banning, we have a whole nother issue in terms of what's acceptable and what will be allowed in a classroom.
And that's one of the things that as I'm on the road and as I'm talking to people, I'm trying to encourage teachers and families to reclaim their freedom to some degree because we've sold ourselves to these curriculum where everything is so micromanaged that we disrespect the teacher. We're disrespecting the teacher's ability to think and make connections. And honestly, it's not respectful to our students either. If we want kids who are creative problem solvers, we need to give them opportunities to think deeply and to engage deeply. And you don't do that by going lockstep with a curriculum where the idea of presenting a full novel is sharing a chapter out of Flora and Ulysses and not the entire book. I had that happen where one of my students thought she had read the entire book and she never got to the part about the shepherdess. She had
Oh.
no idea about the shepherdess lamp. And I had to go, let's go back and revisit this, shall we? And the moment we realized how much of the story her kids had missed was the moment she completely revamped the way that she approached it. And it's not to say there's not good stuff in that curriculum, but you have to use your brain and you have to think about, how do I make space for the kids to finish a real book?
And allow teachers that, there are stylistic differences for teachers, and that's important too. They need to be able to play to their strengths, and that's different for every single teacher. And you're right, it's so limiting. We limit them enough. Let's at least give them the breadth and the flexibility to play with literature.
And I find, especially when I'm on the road and talking, I've been sharing something lately with educators that I developed over the course of the last few years. I call it read, connect, play, reflect. And it's a simple way to build connections to the books you're reading, that you start with that interactive read aloud. So in my case, picture books, but it would certainly apply to Wombat Waiting as well. You could do a read aloud with a novel as well as with a picture book. So you build in that engagement. You find ways to really hook your readers, to connect, to ask those deep questions. But then you look at the connections. How does this connect to my curriculum? How does it connect to the real world? How does it connect to climate change or to the big feelings you're feeling in the classroom? And how can we then build experiences to explore those connections? And that's where we play. It might be a STEM challenge. It might be a way of going, okay, you know, in Wombat Waiting, we're learning about the fires in California. How could we explore ways that, the fires are happening and build our own solutions for how we would stop those fires? And then you come into the reflect piece where you look at what you've created, you go back to the book, and that's where you get your writing in. You get in your chance to talk about what you've learned. So you've got all of it. You've built in your science, your math, your literacy, but you're doing it by weaving it thoughtfully together.
I love the play aspect of that because I think that's the part that gets ignored far too often because of time constraints or budget constraints. And that's the place where kids can really, really have fun with a story. I
And
have
it's needed.
there's a, oh, is it ever? A wonderful teacher I know in Texas who uses the one and only Ivan for her third graders. And it's the only text she uses all year, which is, obviously amazing, but she does it because these are really struggling kids and they're already coming from, really complicated backgrounds and behind in every dimension. And it allows her to go back and say, what would Ivan say about that when they're dealing with a science question or a math question? And for them, just because it's so integrated and it's a very small class with very, deep needs, it works. And that's what you're talking about on a different scale, that ability to just really dive into a story. And I love the reflect part because is that where you write about the story?
That's where you can do your writing about what you've learned. You can write about the story. You can take on a different point of view. And,
Oh,
you could write from Wombat's point of view, but you could also write from the point of view of the bat, for example, and write the
I
scene from
love
the bat's
that.
point of view. So it's a chance to demonstrate your knowledge. And it doesn't just have to be writing because not every kid is
Oh,
strong in writing. Kids communicate in different ways. So I've done things where I've had kids make Spotify playlists for a character and they have to justify their choices or pack a backpack for that character and talk about why they chose these specific things to help that character. So you can do they can make their own podcast. I mean, there are so many ways you can build in communication and being able to share your thinking with your peers.
I love that. I love the backpack. I love the Spotify. Just because again, you're dealing with all these different kids with different needs and abilities, and you're connecting them all, but they're allowed to do it in different ways. And
And in the end, that's what we need. It's like education has to evolve. We've We need our kids to be able to be problem solvers. They need to be able to be creative. They need to be able to collaborate because we've got huge issues that need solving. And you don't solve those issues by memorizing facts. You need to know them and you need to know how to get the information, but you need to know how to think. Imagine a space where curiosity drives innovation, where empathy fuels collaboration, and where learning feels less like a task and more like an adventure. My message isn't about adding more to your plate, it's about changing how you see the plate entirely. I'm Dr. Diane Jackson Schnorr, and through the power of purposeful play, I equip leaders, educators, and organizations with the tools you need to unlock creative problem solving, deepen human connection, and build resistant ecosystems of empathy and innovation. Attendees will walk away not just inspired, but empowered, with immediately usable strategies to spark curiosity in teams, to lead with empathy, and to infuse learning into their everyday cultures. You'll learn how play isn't child's work, it's the secret weapon of the world's most effective leaders and change makers. This is not a feel-good talk that fades by Monday morning, it's a movement. A shift in how we engage people, solve problems, and lead meaningful change. My talks and workshops are shaped by decades of experience in education and a transformative message that connects across sectors. Whether your audience is corporate, educational, or nonprofit, they'll leave ready to rethink what's possible, both personally and professionally. Because when we learn and lead through play, we don't just change organizations, we change the world. Check it out at drdianeadventures.com.
I think with we're talking about AI so much these days. I mean, that's just yet another dimension of the threats to really creative teaching and to creative reading. And so I love that concept.
And I read something, because AI has been a trouble point for me recently as I've been thinking, and I read something just the other day that was talking about the more AI tries to push us into generic sounding like each other, the wilder and crazier and more authentically you need to be. It was sort of like, allow it to give you the freedom to be your absolute rainbow brightest crazy person you are, because AI can't replicate that.
I absolutely love that, because the last thing I tell every school I go to, I don't care if you remember my book, but I want you to remember one thing. Weird is wonderful. Embrace your weird, because there is so much pressure on kids to be just like everybody else. And particularly the age groups I tend to talk to, 4 to 6, 3 to 5, they're just on the cusp of heading into middle school and feeling that horrible pressure. And I think, embracing your weird is the perfect antidote to that. But it never occurred to me it was also an effective way to fight AI. So,
I was like, I don't know who put that out there, but I really loved it. And it was one of those
even
things where I
better.
thought, I'm going to just hold on to that and remember it and embrace it because we need it.
I love it. I love it. That's perfect.
So I know that part of why you wrote Wombat Waiting was to talk about climate change. Environmental themes have been an ongoing bit in really all of your books.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your passion for the environment and sort of what you're hoping kids take from reading you?
I'll tell you an interesting story on this last tour. I was talking to a mixed age group from K to 6, and I was talking about climate change, and it was the Q&A session. And, teachers always and principals always try to remind kids, we're not having a discussion, we're asking a question. And the 7-year-old raised his hand and had a discussion. And and he wanted me to understand his understanding of climate change. And it was about a 2-minute diatribe And it was amazing. And he had it all right. And it was so brilliant. I actually started crying. I was like, okay, the world's going to be okay because we have kids like this that are that well informed. And by the way, that well informed because of teachers and librarians. Let us not forget. But those moments just give me such hope. I I, I do often despair, as we all do, I think, these days. But then you go spend, a couple hours in a fourth grade classroom, and you'll come away feeling okay.
Well, and you said something earlier in the conversation, and I keep coming back to it that when we write for kids, we share the dark, we share the realities of our world, but we also create space to provide hope, to let them see that there's a possible solution and that they can be part of that. And I think that's really powerful. And I know that's hard to do.
You know, it's easier, I think, when you're writing than it is sometimes when you're just living your life. I think that's why we write, to impose order on chaos and understand the world. That's certainly why I write. But I think was it Catherine Patterson who said something about a writer's obligation to provide hope for kids. And I think that's so true that seems like the least we can do.
Absolutely. So, what's your favorite thing about writing for kids?
Well, writing generally, I'm just so happy when I write a sentence that I like, and I'll rewrite it, 200 times to get to just maybe it'll just the music of the sentence will please me, and that's the reason I write. But the reason I write for kids is because they are the best audience on the planet, and every children's writer and illustrator will tell you this. I know you've probably heard it a million times, but it's true. They're not jaded. They're not cynical. They're open to anything. They're honest, about their likes and dislikes. They're funny. And I can't think of a better audience. I would hate writing for adults.
Well, and I find that the people who are the best writers for kids maintain that joy themselves. They
Mhm.
find a way to tap into their inner 8-year-old or their inner 12-year-old,
Yes.
whatever audience it is that you feel called to write for, you somehow are still connected to them in your own life all these many decades later. And I think that that's important too, especially in an age where, there are folks who don't necessarily value writing for children, understanding that there's a real relationship that we build with our audience.
Oh, absolutely. I have a wonderful writer friend, Jennifer Choldenko, with whom I've done a trilogy called Dogtown. She's the one who wrote the Al Capone series and the Alcatraz series. And she says she just basically stopped at 11. And and I think that's true for a lot of writers and illustrators. We just kind of never grew up. Or somehow it's easier to channel those feelings and remember them. But that's why I like to go back regularly and hang out with my readers, because I think you do over time you forget, and then you go back and you go, "Oh yeah. Yeah." You look at the world differently, don't you?
And one of the things I'm finding as I'm getting older is that it's easier to strip away all of that armor that we put on in our
Mm.
20s and 30s, thinking that we have to be grown-ups. And you sort of are able to free yourself to get back to the essence of who that 5-year-old was, or that 8-year-old, or that 12-year-old, which I think is often our true essence of who we are as people. And then we cover it up and suppress it over the years. And so maybe that's what that last part of life is about too, is getting back to who you were.
I love that. We come full circle. We regress in the best possible way.
I'm all for that. So I'm going to ask you the same question I always close with, because I think it's an important one, and I'm finding it's catching people and they're having to think harder about it these days, but it still needs to be asked.
Okay.
What brings you hope?
Oh man.
I'm telling you, it's harder, but it's a
It's
necessary
harder.
exercise for all of us.
It is harder, and it tells you something that it's harder, doesn't it? But that means it's more important than ever. And and I think I just told you what gives me hope. that moment with that 7-year-old kid who's like, I got this. I'm going to tell you what's wrong with the world, and I'm going to tell you how we fix it. And that gives me hope.
I love that. So, Katherine, as you're wrapping up your Wombat Waiting tour, what are you working on now? What can we look forward to seeing in the coming years?
Oh, I have some interesting graphic adaptations and picture book adaptation of some of my books that it hasn't been announced yet, but it's been really fun to work on graphics because that's not my brain doesn't work that way, and I've had to kind of learn a whole new way to tell a story. So that's been fun. I am working on a middle grade novel right now that has a kind of a fantasy element, but it's in that stage where you sure don't talk about it.
Absolutely.
Or the bubble will burst. But it's fun. I'm looking forward to just taking the summer and just reveling and working on that one thing.
That sounds wonderful. Well, we can't wait to talk to you when all of these things come out. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thank you, Diane. It's always a joy.
You've been listening to the Adventures in Learning podcast with your host, Dr. Diane. If you like what you're hearing, please subscribe, download, and let us know what you think, and please tell a friend. If you want the full show notes and the pictures, please go to drdianeadventures.com. We look forward to you joining us on our next adventure.